Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Eve by Iris Johansen. Chapter 14.
"The place is deserted, Colonel Queen,"
Lieutenant Sagalin said.
"The house was lit up like a Christmas tree. Hot coffee in the kitchen. The office looked like a tornado had hit it, but no one is around."
"No sign of Gallo or Eve, Duncan?"
"A woman's jeans and shirt in the bathroom of one of the upper rooms. Gallo's clothes were in his bedroom. Our informant said that Gallo took off before Catherine Ling and Joe Quinn got there."
Queen's hand tightened on the phone. What the hell? He hadn't expected Gallo to go on the run. If anything, he'd expected his men to find Quinn's and Ling's bodies, along with Eve Duncan's in the house. Why had Gallo run? Paul Black? Black had had time to get there from San Francisco. Queen knew how terrifying he could be. Yes, that might be it. Perhaps Gallo wasn't as invulnerable as Queen had thought. He felt a rush of relief. Black had made his choice, and that choice wasn't Queen. And if Gallo had gone on the run, there was no chance that he would have left the ledger at the house. He would have taken it with him. He could only hope that Black was on Gallo's trail. What do we do now? It was probably too late to do more than cover all the bases.
"Go to the library and take every file you find and load the computers in your vans and bring them back here."
"Anything else?"
Queen had a sudden memory of Gallo sitting in that luxurious library, taunting him. He'd acted like some kind of snooty English lord of the manor, instead of the vicious, murdering bastard Queen knew him to be. And Queen had been forced to listen and choke on his fury. But the situation had changed, and that meant the rules had changed. Screw Gallo.
"Burn the damn house down to the ground."
Joe, Eve, and Catherine had reached their car and were on their way down the mountain when Catherine looked up at the rear view mirror.
"My God!"
Eve glanced at the mirror, then quickly over her shoulder. Gallo's beautiful mountain house was burning, the flames licking the surrounding trees and leaping for the sky. "Why?" she whispered. "It was such a lovely house."
"Frustration," Joe said. "Revenge. It was evident that Queen hates Gallo."
Yet it seemed strange to Eve that Gallo, who had been the clear victim of army intelligence, would be so hated. They wanted to hurt him. I wonder what they would have done if they found Hanks or Judy in that house.
"Queen isn't stupid. He'd be careful of any move that might draw attention."
Eve shook her head. "And that fire doesn't draw attention?" "They'd find a way to do it so that it looked like an accident," Catherine said. "It's not difficult." And Catherine would be adept in those methods of destruction. Eve knew.
"You're upset."
Joe's gaze was on her face.
"It's just a house, Eve."
"No, it was a home. I think it meant something to John. He told me he'd had it for 10 years. How would you feel if someone burned down the lake cottage?"
"Mad as hell."
"And I'd be sad."
"And you think Gallo would feel as you do? You're identifying with him."
She shrugged. "I think it would mean something to him. I think he's been hurt enough."
"You'll forgive me if I'm a little lacking in sympathy. I went through hell imagining everything he could be doing to you. I can't identify with him at all."
That was very clear. The entire situation was complicated and barbed with emotion on both their sides. I'm not saying it wasn't wrong of him to do what he did. I'm saying that what he went through may have contributed to his making the mistake. She changed the subject. Where's the plane waiting, Catherine? At a private airport about 30 miles from here, Catherine said. You should be back in Georgia in about 4 hours. That's good. She leaned back in the seat, her gaze once more on the flaming ruin in the rear view mirror. So much ugliness and destruction. It was beginning to touch everyone and everything around her. Tonight, Joe had been wounded, and it might have been horribly more serious. And it had been her fault that he had been hurt. He had come to the rescue as he always did, and he would always do, because Eve would not stop, could not stop, as long as Bonnie and her killer were out there. And someday Joe's selfless giving would end tragically. It was only a matter of time. She could feel the tears sting her eyes as her every emotion vibrated in rejection of that thought. No, she couldn't let it happen. Paul Black stood on the north slope and gazed at the flaming fury of the burning house. Pity. It had been a nice house, and now Black would have no chance to go in and search it. It appeared that Queen, as usual, had been ruled by his emotions and not his head when he'd given the order to put it to the torch. It annoyed him that Queen was getting in his way even before the hunt had begun. Even before the hunt had begun. He leaned back against a tree and watched Queen's errand boys get into their trucks and start down the mountain. He was no longer in any hurry. He had missed Gallo, but had watched all the other people pour out of the house. He had license numbers and photos of all of them. He'd email them to Queen and have him identify them. Then he'd carefully choose who was to receive his attention. Find a mate. Find a cub. Find a bait so succulent it was impossible to resist. There was always a way to trap the prey, like the prey Black had just devoured. Pretty little Danielle, who had followed him from the airport as if he was the Pied Piper, once he'd offer her the right bait. The flames were burning hotter now. He felt as if he could feel them from where he watched. He liked fire. Everyone spoke of the fires of hell, and he had always thought he would have no problem there. If there was a hell, he was sure he would become the archdemon and rule it. If there was no hell, perhaps a man like him could live forever. Sometimes, after a kill like tonight's, he felt as if he could take enough lives that they would give him the power he needed to carry on. He should go soon. There would be police and firemen coming to put out the fire. But perhaps he would take a few more minutes to enjoy it. As he stared at the yellow-orange flames, he thought he could see the faces of all the prey he had taken through his life like a giant kaleidoscope, moving in and out in a blurring haze. He could not make out all the distinctive faces, but he recognized the Samoan teenager he had gutted only last week. And of course, the little Danielle from the airport. She was still fresh in his memory. But the power she had given him was already fading, and the hunger was beginning anew. He needed a new kill, a strong kill. Gallo? Yes, Gallo would be strong. Or perhaps if Black was lucky, The road to Gallo would be paved with a river of blood. How about coffee? Catherine asked Eve as she unbuckled a seatbelt after the plane had gained altitude. I could use one. The adrenaline has seeped out of me and I need a replacement. No thanks. Eve was looking out the window. I might try to sleep. Whatever. Catherine moved down the aisle to the coffee bar in the front of the plane. She had just poured coffee into the styrofoam cup when Joe came out of the cockpit. She handed him the cup and reached for another herself. You don't look like you want to sleep either. How's the arm? Throbbing. His gaze went to Eve. She okay? She's very quiet, Joe. Catherine poured herself coffee. But I can't blame her. We're not on her wavelength right now. All she would get would be an argument. And after what she's been through, that's not what she needs. He has her hypnotized, he said grimly. No one hypnotizes Eve, Catherine said flatly. But I agree he must be clever as hell. He managed to tap into the one passion that could blind her to everything else. Bonnie, his lips tightened. But maybe there could be another passion just as strong. She told me that she was different when she knew Gallo. Jealousy. Catherine had been afraid that demon would raise its head. Joe was one of the most confident men she had ever met, but an all-consuming passion like the one he had for Eve would have primitive roots. But she's grown up. That girl doesn't exist any longer. No, it's only Bonnie you have to worry about. Only Bonnie. Joe lifted his cup to his lips. That's like saying only a Cat 5 tornado. He leaned back against the cockpit door. And if he's using Bonnie, then I need to move fast. I have to find him before he contacts Eve again. Maybe he won't contact her. He left her when he knew we were coming, which was the smartest thing he could have done. He put himself in the position of avoiding confrontation and hurting people she loved. Now by running away, he's also lost his home, friends, and way of life. And Eve is feeling sorry for him. Damn it. How the hell can I fight that? She smiled. You'll manage. You're already thinking about it. What are you going to do? Go after Hanks? I had to let him go, but he'll be easier to find than Gallo. I've just been on the phone with a friend in the bureau and asked him to email me a dossier and any records of Hank's relationship with a John Gallo. Hank said he didn't know where Gallo is. Even if it's true he's been with Gallo for years, I might be able to trace, connect, and reach a possible destination. I think Judy Clark would be a better source. Then you go in that direction. She's very loyal and fierce about Gallo. I'd rather deal with Hanks. Catherine smiled and nodded. A regular pepper pot. He seems to have a way with the ladies, Joe said dryly. Judy didn't impress me as being able to be swayed by charm. Neither is Eve. It could be they're seeing something there that we can't. He finished his coffee and threw the cup in the waste container. You'll have to tell me whether they're right when you meet 'em. He stared down the aisle toward Eve. Catherine watched him sit down beside Eve and fasten his seatbelt. Eve smiled slightly, then looked back out the window, where the purple clouds were being touched with the gold of dawn. Yes, Eve was definitely quiet and a little remote, Catherine thought. Eve was thinking, weighing, and feeling very much alone. That could be dangerous. When they reached Atlanta, Catherine walked Eve and Joe to their rental car before getting back on the jet to be flown home to Kentucky. She fell back with Eve as Joe went around the car to get into the driver's seat. If you need me, call me, she said quietly. I'm here for you no matter what. I may argue with you, but in the end I'll do whatever you want me to do. That's what friends are all about. Don't close me out. I know you and Joe want the best for me. You're thinking of us as a team. We worked together because it was necessary. She made a face. And because a lot of the time we think alike, but we're not joined at the hip. Remember that, Eve. I will. She opened the passenger door. Have a good trip home, Catherine. I'll be placing a few calls to Venable and seeing if I can get a handle on where to find Hanks and Judy Clark. She gave Eve a hug and looked at Joe as he started the car. Take care of that arm, Joe.
Right. Say hello to Luke for me.
If I can tear him away from the lost cities of the ancient world. Since he found that book, he's been glued to it. She stepped back. I think he may be planning on finding a couple of them. Luke is so independent. It wouldn't surprise me if he got a plan together and took off on his own. But I'm going to work at it and make sure he includes me in that expedition. That may be my chance at bonding. She turned back to the plane. I'll call you if I find out anything from Venable. Eve watched her as Catherine climbed the steps and boarded. Then she glanced at Joe. She's already in work mode again. Joe shrugged. She's CIA, and she has a personal interest. I'm glad to have her on board. She smiled faintly. Because you think alike.
Yeah.
He drove out of the airport lot onto the street. With some exceptions, she's more inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt. He was talking about John Gallo. She didn't answer. It was difficult defending John, and she was too tired and drained to make the attempt. She turned away and watched the skyscrapers and domes of the great city flow by the window.
Why don't you take a nap?
Joe asked Eve as he unlocked the door of the cottage. You didn't sleep on the plane at all. I tried. Eve looked at the blue and white notice she'd taken off the door. FedEx tried to deliver my skull from Texas. I'll have to call them and tell them to redeliver. It seemed such a long time ago when she'd waited out on the porch for that delivery. She put the notice on the kitchen bar. You didn't stop at a hospital to have that wound looked at. I'll do it on the way to the precinct. You're going in to work? His brows lifted. I do have a job. She gave him the ghost of a smile. When I don't interfere with it. You could hardly help it in this case, could you? I'll shower and change and be out of here. He went past her down the hall. She went back out on the porch and sat down on the swing. She would try to sleep in a little while, but she was too wired right now. She would sit here and let the peace of this familiar, beautiful place sink in and quiet her spirit. Had Gallo gotten in the habit of going back to his place in the mountains for the same reason? To heal wounds and quiet his soul after the storms of life? But he no longer had a place to go for sanctuary now. And she was identifying with him again. She mustn't do that if she was to get what she wanted from him. Joe thought Gallo was the enemy, and perhaps that was true, but not for the reason that Joe feared. She set the swing gently rocking, watching the morning breeze stir the tops of the trees. Help me, Bonnie. I don't know what to do. Everything is more of a mystery than I dreamed. I believed him. But is it true? If it's not a lie, did you come to love him? And if you loved him, does that mean I have to help him? You healed his wounds and kept him sane. Is that what you want from me? No answer. No sudden, wonderful, loving vision of her daughter to give her any sense of those answers. Of course not. Bonnie never came on demand, damn it. That would be too easy. So work it out for yourself, Eve thought. That's what life is all about. No easy answers. What are you thinking? Joe stood in the doorway looking at her. You're frowning. She forced a smile. I was thinking that there are no easy answers, and that I was ready for a lightning bolt to flash down and illuminate all the darkness. But that would be an easy answer. Joe moved over to the swing and stood looking down at her. Did I ever tell you how beautiful you look with the sunlight on you? You're blind. I've got to have circles under my eyes, and my hair looks like a haystack. It doesn't matter. You glow from inside out, and then the sun touches you, and it shows how your eyes shimmer with life in every character line. Those are called wrinkles, Joe. Those are called beautiful. He bent down and gently brushed her lips. Trust me. Lord, she loved him. She pulled him down and held him close. Why are you saying this? Why now? Because I looked at you, and I remember that no matter how many problems we have, it would be worse being apart, he said gruffly. I can't be easy. It's not my nature, but it's my nature to love you. He kissed her quick and hard and released her. That's all. Remember that when I'm being a surly son of a bitch and out to hold on to you through hell and high water. He turned and ran down the porch steps. Go to bed and try to get at least a little sleep before you call FedEx to bring back that skull. You don't need to dive into work without any rest. I'll call you later and bring home dinner. She watched him get into the car and back out of the driveway. No, he'd never be easy. Joe was brilliant, complicated, and wary. He made friends with extreme caution and kept them forever. Dear God, how lucky she'd been that he loved her and wanted to keep her in that same golden circle. Joe's car turned the curve in the road and disappeared from view. As a golden circle could be broken, as a life could so easily be lost. Joe. The key John had given her. Why hadn't she told Joe and Catherine about it? At first it had slipped her mind, but later it had been a conscious decision. But why had she made that decision? She took out the cell phone that John Gallo had handed back to her in that bedroom. He had said that it was to communicate with Joe, but had he really meant that to be the purpose? She had come to realize that nothing about John was clear and absolutely straightforward. He had abandoned her to Joe and Catherine tonight, but wasn't that the best way to avoid the complications he had been trying to skirt? And then he had given her back her phone. Had he also given her a choice? She slowly scrolled back to John Gallo's call the first day that he had phoned her. Choice? She wasn't prepared to make that choice yet. She was tired and emotionally drained. She had to give herself time to think and make sure she wasn't going to stampede herself into doing something as impulsive as that 16-year-old kid she had been might have done. She started to put the phone back in her pocket, then stopped and dialed the number of FedEx. She would have the skull delivered as soon as possible and start work. Doing the reconstruction would remind her of who she was and how far she had come from that girl in the Peabody Housing Development. Joe didn't come home until almost midnight. He'd called her late in the afternoon and told her he was going to have to work late on a murder case in Vinnings. He quietly slipped into bed. "Awake?" he whispered. "Oh, yes." She yawned and cuddled closer. "I was working. I saw the reconstruction on your work table. I told you to take a nap. I wanted to work. I didn't do much, only started the measurements." "Have you named him yet?" "Dale." "Do you want to talk about him?" His hand was stroking her hair. "Dale?" "John Gallo." No, unless you want me to talk about him." He didn't answer for a moment. "Not right now, but we're going to have to do it. You're behaving, I don't know." He pulled her tighter. "But I don't like it." She didn't like it either. She didn't like the fact that she had worked for hours trying to block thoughts of Gallo and Paul Black out of her mind and hadn't succeeded. She didn't like that she felt a tension building whenever Joe mentioned Gallo's name. He kissed her and nestled her head into the hollow of his shoulder. "We'll work it out. Go to sleep." She closed her eyes, feeling the pounding of his heart beneath her ear. Life. She brushed her lips against his warm, smooth skin. She wanted to feel the textures, breathe the sense of him. She wanted to cherish this moment, but she could feel the choice approaching. She got up with Joe and had coffee with him before he left for work. Then she started working on the reconstruction of the little boy. More measurements, concentrate. They all had to be correct. But she couldn't concentrate. By 11, she knew there was no way she could block the decision any longer. She shook her head as she gazed at the skull on the easel. "I'm sorry, Dale," she said softly. "It's not that you're not important, but you'll have to wait a little longer." She took out her phone and walked out on the porch. Choice. She handed her the phone. He handed her the phone and must have realized what that meant. She rolled back the calls and brought up the number from where he'd called her. She pressed the button for return call. It rang twice. On the third ring, Gallo picked up. "Is Joe Quinn standing at your shoulder?" "No." She had to gather her thoughts. She hadn't been sure that he would answer. "I can't involve Joe any more in this. He was shot last night." Silence. "I know. Hanks called and reported after he left the compound. I didn't want that to happen. Is Quinn okay?" "Yes, but it did happen. He was hurt. He could have been killed. This is your responsibility. Make it right. Tell me where to find Paul Black." He chuckled. "You're using guilt to get your own way. That's very ruthless, Eve." "I'll use whatever I have to use. I have to find Bonnie's killer. I won't have Joe sacrificed on the altar of my obsession." "Yet you can't give up the hunt." "No, and that's my guilt." He was silent. "We're a fine pair, aren't we, Eve?" "Tell me," she said. "You said you didn't want to destroy me, but can't you see? I'm destroying myself and Joe. I have to find him. I have to find her. You won't let me do it for you. I have to know. I have to be certain. And you can't trust me. I don't know you. I've never known you. How can I trust you? She paused. But I know that, in spite of what you said, you wanted to leave the door open for me. You wouldn't have given me back my phone. You wouldn't have answered the call. My door is always open for you, Eve. And you gave me that key. How did you know I wouldn't turn it over to Queen? I had to take the chance. I knew Queen would take advantage of what I'd done to make his move. You had to be protected. Has he contacted you yet? No, he will. He didn't find what he wanted at the house, and he'll start exploring possibilities. He made me angry. She paused. He burned your house. Hanks told me. Judy managed to get out everything that was valuable from the office. Senseless. Queen wanted to hurt you. She paused. Did he do it? Yes. He didn't speak for a moment. Stupid. I knew with my head that it was just a shell made out of brick and wood. I knew it could be taken away from me like everything else. I was prepared for it. But I'd never really had a home, even as a kid. I guess I wanted one. Funny. I suppose it sort of crept in when I wasn't looking. Primitive instinct. We're all savages once you tear away the trappings. It was a lovely place. It's gone. Don't think about it. Is that your philosophy? I don't think so. Bonnie is gone. You're still thinking about her. That's different. Yes, everything about Bonnie and her life and death were different and special. Did Paul Black kill her? He didn't answer immediately. I believe he did. Do you know where he is? No, but I know how to bring him to me. Her hand tightened on the phone until the knuckles turned white. Then tell me where you are. I have to be with you. He didn't speak. I'm not going to plead with you. But I swear I'll give that key to Queen. Maybe he knows something about Black that he didn't tell Catherine. And I'll let Queen use me as bait to try to get to you. I don't think you'd want me to do that. You'd be crazy to deal with him, John said roughly. You just having that key will tell him that you know too much. That was your insurance policy. He's an Army intelligence agent. He might have you targeted, but I'm a private citizen. He'd have a difficult time trying to harass me. I'm not talking about harassment. His breath expelled with exasperation. I'll say you're not pleading. Back off, Eve. This isn't a good move. I can't back off. Tell me how to reach you. She had to persuade him. I have a right, John. No one has a better right than I do to catch that bastard. You know it, and I know it. Isn't that the real reason you made contact with me? You say we're all savages. Maybe that primitive instinct told you that this was something we had to do together. He was still silent, and Eve wasn't sure that she'd made an impact. Then he said, Take the Delta flight to Milwaukee this afternoon. When you get in, call me, and I'll come and get you. Queen will probably have someone following you. He won't stop you because he'll hope you're leading him to me. And I will be. I'll take care of that when you get here. Be careful. He hung up. It was done. Eve hung up and stared out at the lake. We're going to find you, Bonnie, she whispered. This is the time, isn't it? This is how you wanted it. Why was that certainly growing within her? She could be fooling herself because she wanted it so much. And the search had gone on so long. She was taking a chance on John Gallo. Joe and Catherine were right that he was the ultimate wild card. And she had taken a chance on him once before, and it had changed her life. He had given her Bonnie. Stop questioning. The decision was made. She got to her feet and moved toward the door. She would make her airline reservations, write a note to Joe, and try to get a couple hours sleep. She went to her work table and covered the reconstruction she'd started on Dale. "Just a little interruption," she whispered. "You've waited a long time. Wait just a little longer." He was her job, her duty. This was the part of her life that had been born when she had lost Bonnie. But she had to return to the time before she had become the woman who had brought all those other children home until she could come back and do that duty. If she came back. Was that why she was having this feeling of destiny? The conviction that Bonnie was guiding her. Was she going to die and join Bonnie? Did Bonnie know that this time Eve would not come back to Joe? The prospect held no fear for Eve. Joe would be safe. Jane and Joe, Joe and Jane would have each other. And she would have Bonnie.
Eve Duncan just boarded a flight for Milwaukee, Queen told Jacobs when he hung up the phone. "I've told one of our people in the Chicago office to get over to Milwaukee and make sure she's under surveillance."
"Why Milwaukee?" Jacobs asked. "Quinn wasn't with her?"
"No, he's at ATLPD headquarters."
Queen smiled unpleasantly.
"I think she's given him the slip. Maybe Quinn was wrong about Gallo taking Eve Duncan. It could be that she decided to renew old times. They must have been a hot item when they were younger."
"You believe she's gone to join Gallo again?" Jacobs repeated. "Why Milwaukee?"
"Gallo grew up in Milwaukee. He knows it like the back of his hand. He'd feel comfortable there."
He paused. "Maybe enough to find a hiding place for the ledger. And you believe Duncan is joining him because they're having an affair?"
"Women seem to find him attractive. He's had several mistresses over the years. Even a couple movie actresses. Why else?"
"I've researched her when Gallo requested the files on her. She's not the kind of woman who'd abandon her career and a stable relationship to jump into bed with a man she hasn't seen in years."
"She was willing to do it when she was 16. Maybe she still has a yen for him."
He shrugged.
"At any rate, we should explore it. I doubt if Gallo feels the same way, but if there's a chance, we'll grab it." "There's another possibility."
He paused.
"Paul Black."
Queen shook his head.
"I don't think Black has surfaced yet. He had me email him some information about Gallo's employees. And I sent him current info about Eve Duncan as well, including the fact that she's on her way to Milwaukee."
"Why pull Black into it?"
"Why not? The hunted pursuing the hunter. Better he go after Gallo than me. I knew I shouldn't have tried to hand Black over to Gallo. It boomeranged, and it could have been fatal. But I handled it damn well."
"So you say," Jacob said. "But you've been prone to impulsive behavior of late. You didn't have to burn down Gallo's place. It will make him difficult to negotiate with if that becomes necessary." Bastard. Jacobs hadn't had to deal with Gallo all these years. He hadn't realized what bullshit Queen had to take from him.
"It won't be necessary. I'll find him, and I'll find the ledger. The woman may be the answer.
He turned and moved toward the door. She's going to find Gallo a little too hot to handle. The note was propped up on the coffee maker on the counter. Joe had expected it. He had tried to phone home twice before he'd gotten into his car and driven home. He tore open the envelope and pulled out the sheet of paper. Joe, I'm with John Gallo. He can lead me to black. You know why I didn't tell you before. It's time I assumed full responsibility. God knows I've leaned on you too long. This isn't your war, and I won't have you be a casualty. I'll be in touch. I love you. Eve. His hand clenched the paper, then he crushed it into a ball and hurled it onto the counter. Control the anger and the fear. He had known this could be coming. It had been building for the last few years, and he had been able to fight it off. He would still fight it off. But he had to find Eve first. He pulled out his phone and dialed Eve. Voicemail. He called Catherine. She answered immediately. Trouble? Why would you think that? Eve was too quiet. She's gone to John Gallo. He's convinced her he can take her to black. Then we have to find Gallo. I suppose she's not answering her phone? Voicemail. Catherine was silent. Okay, so I tracked down Judy Clark while you go after Hanks? Can you? How is your son? Luke is fine. I've hired a live-in tutor for him. Sam O'Neill used to work for the CIA, but he retired a few years ago. He was a teacher before he joined the company, and he decided to go back to it. I figured they'd be a good match. Sam's a nice guy, but tough, and they get along. Luke wouldn't know what to do with a cozy maternal housekeeper, she added. Luke doesn't need me. After being on his own all these years, he's totally independent. He reads and studies, and sometimes we even have discussions. It's a start. She paused. I wish he did need me, but that will come, she added brusquely. I'll call Venable and see what we can pull up on Hanks and Judy Clark. And I'll go to the airport and check to see if Eve left her car there. It's not here, he added. Thanks, Catherine. I need to move fast. Do you think I'm doing it for you? It's Eve. Every time I look at my son, I remember that I wouldn't have him with me if it wasn't for her. And you do need to move fast. Gallo has her blinded. Hell, maybe she's right about him, but he scares me. He's unpredictable. Queen could be right about him having a split personality, and there's no one more convincing than someone who believes that he's telling the truth. Let me know if she's taken a flight. She hung up. Split personality? Possible answer. Eve was not easily fooled. She had great instincts about people and would not be easily dazzled. But Gallo had dazzled her when she was 16. Don't think about it. Think about the Eve you know now. The Eve who could be walking into Gallo's trap.